In the suburban outskirts of Austin, Texas, Gregory Adams was a man who had it all. At 45, he had built a solid career as an architect at a prestigious firm, working on high-profile projects across the country. Gregory was known for his dedication, spending countless hours at his drafting table, ensuring every detail of his designs was flawless. His colleagues admired his commitment, but few truly knew the depth of his sacrifice. Gregory lived in a beautiful home with his wife, Emily. She was a 36-year-old wedding photographer who had made a name for herself in the industry. Her schedule was demanding, with constant travel to shoot weddings in cities far and wide. Though her work was rewarding, Emily had always been a bit of an enigma to Gregory. She was successful, yes, but she had a way of slipping into the background, consumed by her craft. Emily's schedule was unpredictable, often leaving Gregory to fill the quiet gaps of their home life alone. Despite the long hours they both worked, their life together seemed perfect from the outside. Gregory admired Emily's artistry, and she supported his ambitions as well. They had their routines, shared dinners, and even the occasional quiet evening at home. But as time passed, something began to change. The spark they once had started to fade, and it was more than just the physical distance between them. Emily's work required her to be away more often. At first, Gregory understood. He knew the demands of her job and was proud of her accomplishments. But soon the long weekends away turned into weeks at a time. Each trip was justified with a new important wedding or a rare opportunity to work with a high-profile client. Gregory never questioned it, always reassuring himself that Emily was doing what she loved. But then the small signs began to appear. Emily was often distracted when she was home, barely looking up from her phone during their meals together. She seemed uninterested in conversation, her responses short and distant. At first, Gregory brushed it off as stress from her job, something that would pass. But the distance kept growing and Gregory started feeling the weight of her absence, not just physically but emotionally. It was a growing emptiness he couldn't ignore. One evening, as Gregory was finishing up some work at home, Emily told him about a charity gala happening in downtown Austin. It was an exclusive event, attended by many of her colleagues and clients in the creative industry. "I think you should come with me," she said, her voice lacking the usual enthusiasm. It was rare for her to invite him to such events, but there was something in her tone that made him say yes, despite his reservations. The night of the gala arrived, and Gregory found himself dressed in his best suit, feeling a mix of excitement and unease. The venue was grand, filled with well-dressed individuals laughing and chatting in the elegant ballroom. Emily was by his side at first, introducing him to a few people, but she seemed more preoccupied than usual. Her eyes were frequently on her phone, checking messages or responding to emails, her attention barely lingering on Gregory. It felt like she was present but not really there. Gregory, ever the understanding husband, tried to make the best of the evening. He spoke with some of Emily's friends and acquaintances, but his mind kept drifting back to her behavior. Why was she acting so distant? Why did she seem so detached when they used to share everything? There was a knot growing in his stomach, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the evening wore on, Emily grew more anxious. Gregory caught glimpses of her fidgeting, glancing around nervously, and it unsettled him. He thought about confronting her, but he didn't want to make a scene at such an important event. Instead, he decided to give her space, assuming that whatever was bothering her might pass. But then, just as they were about to make their way to the main dining area, Emily excused herself to the restroom. Gregory stood by himself, nursing his drink and trying to maintain his composure. He couldn't deny the nagging feeling in his gut that something was terribly wrong. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Gregory glanced around the room, noticing how alone he felt. The clink of glasses and the hum of conversation filled the air, but it only seemed to heighten the silence between him and his wife. He sent her a text asking if she was okay. No reply. Worry began to gnaw at him. He excused himself and went to find her. The gala was held in a grand, historic building, and the dimly lit corridors felt increasingly eerie as he walked past the bustling crowds, his footsteps echoing in the quiet spaces. And then he found her. Outside the building, near the parking lot, Emily stood next to a young man. His name was Jason, a photographer who often worked in the wedding industry just like Emily. Gregory had heard her mention him before, but he had never thought much of it. Now, as he stood in the shadows watching them, he saw something that took his breath away. Emily and Jason were standing close together. The way they were positioned, the way they looked at each other, it was more than just professional camaraderie. They were holding each other in a way that was intimate, personal. Their bodies were pressed close, and before Gregory could fully comprehend what he was seeing, Jason leaned in and they kissed. The kiss was deep and passionate, a moment of raw desire that made Gregory's heart stop. He stood there frozen, a whirlwind of emotions crashing over him. Betrayal. Rage. It was as if the ground beneath him had shattered. But instead of confronting them immediately, Gregory took a deep breath. His hands shook, but he remained calm, his voice steady as he stepped forward and said, "Emily, I know what's going on." Emily's face turned pale as she pulled away from Jason. She looked guilty, like a deer caught in the headlights, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. Jason, clearly uncomfortable, muttered something about leaving, and with that he walked off into the night. Emily turned to face Gregory, her expression a mix of panic and confusion. "Gregory, I can explain?" But Gregory didn't want to hear it. The truth was undeniable, and the pain of the moment overwhelmed any words she could offer. Without saying another word, he turned and walked away. The air felt heavy around him as he made his way back inside, his mind racing. The night that had once promised to be just another social event had turned into something far more devastating. Gregory's world had shifted in that moment, and as he stood in the cold, dark parking lot, he realized that his life, his marriage, had just come crashing down. The next morning, the weight of what Gregory had witnessed still hung heavily over him. He couldn't escape the image of Emily and Jason locked in a kiss, the intimacy between them more than just a physical act. It was a betrayal of everything they had built together. Gregory sat in his study, the quiet hum of the early morning around him, but inside there was a storm. The night before felt surreal, as though the life he had known had been pulled out from under him in a matter of seconds. Emily had called him several times after he left the gala, her voice pleading over voicemail. "Greg, please, I need to explain. Can we talk?" Each message was more desperate than the last. But Gregory didn't pick up. What could she say? What words could she offer to explain what he had seen? His mind was a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and betrayal, but amidst it all, one thought remained clear. He couldn't continue living a lie. He had supported her, trusted her, and yet she had shattered that trust in front of him without a second thought. As the morning wore on, Gregory knew what he had to do. The pain he felt wasn't just from the betrayal, it was the realization that their relationship had been built on a fragile foundation. They had grown apart long before the kiss, long before the quiet evenings that had turned into silent spaces between them. The physical distance had been there, but the emotional distance had started years ago, creeping in unnoticed. By mid-morning, Gregory found himself in their shared office space, flipping through legal forms on his computer. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. Emily wasn't just his wife, she was his partner, the mother of their 8-year-old daughter Lily. But he couldn't let the betrayal slide. It wasn't just a fleeting mistake, it was a breach of everything they had worked for. As much as it hurt, he was ready to face the truth. He called his lawyer and set up a meeting for later that afternoon. There was no going back. Gregory couldn't see any way forward that didn't involve walking away from this life. When Emily returned home later that day, she found Gregory sitting in the living room, his expression unreadable. She stood in the doorway, unsure of how to begin. The silence between them was thick with tension, both of them knowing that the conversation ahead would change everything. "Greg, I'm so sorry," Emily said, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It's just that. Jason, Gregory stood up, cutting her off. "Save it, Emily. I saw everything. You don't need to explain. I saw you with him. I saw the way you kissed him." His voice was calm, but there was a coldness in his eyes that cut deeper than any shouting could have. Emily took a step forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "Gregory, please, I love you. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You have to believe me. It was a mistake. I was confused and I—" "Stop," Gregory interrupted, his voice firmer now. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that everything's fine when it's not. You've been pulling away for months and I've watched you choose everything over me, over us." The words stung, but they were the truth. Emily's silence spoke volumes. She hadn't expected him to confront her like this. In truth, she didn't know what she had expected, but it wasn't this. She had hoped for forgiveness, for the chance to explain herself, to make it right. But the reality was that the damage had been done, and there was no turning back. Gregory's eyes softened for a moment as he looked at her, but the hurt was still there, deep in his chest. "I can't live in a marriage where I don't trust you. I'm asking for a divorce." Emily's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the response she had wanted, but deep down, she had known this was coming. She had known that there was only so much distance she could create before it all came crashing down. Her hands trembled as she wiped away a tear, but she didn't argue. What could she say? The truth was she had pushed him away and now there was nothing left to hold on to. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Gregory." Gregory stood still for a moment, his heart heavy but resolute. "I'm filing for full custody of Lily," he said quietly, his gaze unwavering. "She deserves better than this." Emily nodded, her face pale. She hadn't expected that, but Gregory's decision was final. There was no chance to negotiate, no space for bargaining. The damage was irreparable. As Gregory walked out of the room, his footsteps felt heavy, each one marking the end of something he had once believed was unbreakable. He went upstairs to his office, where he drafted the papers for the divorce, his hands shaking only slightly. This was the right thing to do, he told himself. It was the only choice left. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set, Gregory met with his lawyer, and the divorce papers were finalized. The legal battle had begun and Gregory's focus was now on one thing: his daughter. He would fight for Lily no matter the cost. Back at home, Emily sat alone in the living room, the weight of the situation settling over her like a suffocating fog. She had lost everything. The career she had worked so hard to build, the marriage she thought was unbreakable, and now, even her daughter's future was uncertain. All because of her own choices. And as the day turned to night, she realized that she had to start over, alone. Days turned into weeks, and the fallout from the divorce became increasingly real. Gregory and Emily no longer shared the same house, the silence between them broken only by the occasional exchange regarding Lily's care. Gregory had moved into a small apartment not far from the family home, taking his daughter with him every other weekend. He poured himself into his work, determined to keep his mind occupied, but every quiet moment was a reminder of the life he had once known. Emily, on the other hand, was struggling. She had lost more than just her marriage. The fallout from the affair was a public spectacle in the wedding photography industry, a community where reputation meant everything. Many of her clients canceled their upcoming sessions, and the phone calls that once filled her schedule had dwindled to almost nothing. The guilt she felt weighed heavily on her, and her efforts to rebuild her career felt futile. She had moved into a small studio apartment on the other side of Austin, away from the life she had shared with Gregory. The apartment was sparsely furnished, a stark contrast to the warm, comfortable home she had left behind. The place felt cold, a constant reminder of her failure. But despite her guilt, there was a part of Emily that knew she deserved this. She had broken her marriage and now she had to live with the consequences. Gregory, meanwhile, had adjusted to his new routine. He spent his weekdays working long hours at the architecture firm, overseeing projects and meeting with clients. But on weekends he was a father, dedicated to Lily, making sure she felt loved and supported despite the changes in their family. He took her to the park, helped her with her homework, and even started cooking dinner more often, something he hadn't done much before. Lily's laughter and joy were the only things that kept him grounded. There were moments, though, when the silence of the apartment became suffocating. Gregory would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it had all gone wrong. The thoughts of Emily, the woman he had loved and trusted, haunted him. He missed the good times, the quiet moments when they had been happy together. But the ache of betrayal was still fresh, the memories now tainted by the images of Emily with Jason. He couldn't shake it. He knew he had made the right choice, but the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. One evening, Gregory decided to take a walk to clear his mind. He ended up near the coffee shop where he and Emily had met years ago. The small, cozy cafe had once been their favorite spot, where they would share coffee and talk about their day, their dreams, their future. He had come here alone that evening, but as he sat at a table by the window, sipping his drink, the memories flooded back. It felt like a different lifetime. He sat there for a long while, lost in thought, before finally making his way home. But when he arrived, he found a voicemail from Emily. It was her third message of the day, her voice frantic, almost pleading. "Gregory, please, I need to talk to you. It's important. I don't know where else to go." Despite everything, Gregory couldn't ignore her call. He had no intention of reconciling, but there was something in her voice, a desperation that pulled at him. He called her back. When Emily picked up, there was a long silence before either of them spoke. "Gregory," she began, her voice shaky. I don't know what to do. I've tried reaching out to some of my old clients, but nothing's working. I've lost everything, my career, my reputation. And I don't even know where to start over. I need help. Can you at least point me in the right direction?" Gregory was silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had no obligation to help her, especially after what she had done. But there was a part of him that understood her struggle. She had always been a driven woman, passionate about her work. Seeing her now vulnerable and broken, stirred something in him, something he didn't want to acknowledge. "Emily," he said quietly, "I don't know what to tell you. You need to fix this on your own. I can't keep helping you." "I know," she whispered, a sob catching in her throat. "I know, and I'm sorry. I just don't know where to go from here." Gregory's chest tightened. "I can't be the one to fix this for you, Emily. You've got to figure it out. You've got to rebuild your life without relying on me." Emily took a shaky breath. "I understand. But please know I'm sorry. For everything." Gregory was quiet for a long time. It was hard to let go of the woman he had once known, the woman who had been his partner in life. But the reality of their situation had set in. They had both made their choices and now they had to live with them. He hung up without saying another word. As Gregory sat alone in his apartment that night, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Helping Emily wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't undo the pain, the broken trust, or the years they had spent together. But he knew one thing for certain. His focus now had to be on his daughter, Lily. She needed him more than anyone else. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her apartment, staring at the wall. She had always been strong, always found a way to make things work. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt utterly lost. She had made mistakes and now she was paying the price. The phone rang again, but this time it wasn't Gregory. It was a call from one of her old clients. She answered hesitantly, the conversation awkward, but it was the first step in what would be a long and painful journey to rebuild her life. As the days passed, Emily began to take small steps toward redemption. She reached out to old colleagues, attended industry events, and slowly started rebuilding her portfolio. It wasn't easy, but she was determined. The road ahead would be long, but she had no other choice but to keep moving forward. The months following the divorce felt like a series of endless days. Gregory's life had settled into a new rhythm, one defined by the responsibilities of single fatherhood and the quiet satisfaction of a workweek well done. His job at the architecture firm kept him busy, and he had become an expert at balancing work and caring for Lily. They spent weekends together, their little apartment now a home, filled with laughter and the sounds of childhood joy. Despite everything, Gregory had grown into his new role. He found comfort in the routine, in the little moments with Lily that made him feel like he was doing something right. But the ache, the hollow feeling of betrayal, never truly left him. There were nights when he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he would ever feel whole again. But there was one thing he knew: he could never go back. Emily's betrayal had carved too deep a wound, one that time couldn't heal in a way that would allow him to forget. He was a father now, and the thought of putting his daughter through any more emotional turmoil was enough to keep him from even considering reconciliation with Emily. She had made her choices, and now he had to protect Lily from the consequences. Emily, on the other hand, found herself trapped in a cycle of rebuilding, a cycle that was slow and painful. The wedding photography industry, the world she had once thrived in, had turned its back on her. It wasn't just the clients who had abandoned her. Her peers, the ones she had considered friends, now avoided her at industry events, their whispered conversations and cold stares unmistakable. There were moments when Emily thought about reaching out to Gregory, begging him to understand, to forgive her. But she knew that it was too late. The damage had been done, and now all she could do was try to start over from the very beginning. She took on smaller gigs, working with new photographers and clients who didn't know her past. It was a humbling experience, one that constantly reminded her of the mistakes she had made. One day, as she sat in a small studio reviewing a new project, Emily received a message from Gregory. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. It was a simple text: "Lily wants to visit you next weekend. We'll drive her over." Emily stared at the screen, the message lingering in her mind. She hadn't seen Lily in weeks. She missed her daughter more than she could express, but she also knew that seeing her would only remind her of everything she had lost. Gregory's decision to allow her to see Lily felt like a lifeline, but it also stung with the reminder that their family was no longer whole. Emily replied quickly, "Thank you, Greg. I'll be ready for her." The days leading up to the visit felt like an eternity. Emily cleaned her apartment, making sure everything was perfect for Lily. She bought her favorite snacks, laid out toys she knew Lily enjoyed, and even planned a small outing to the park. But as the weekend approached, the excitement was tempered by anxiety. What would it be like seeing her daughter again? What would Gregory say when he dropped her off? Would he see how hard she was trying to rebuild her life, or would he see only the mistakes she had made? When the day finally arrived, Emily stood at the door, her heart pounding. Gregory arrived just before noon, driving a car she didn't recognize. He stepped out first, his face still carrying the stoic expression he had worn since the divorce. But when Lily jumped out of the back seat and ran toward her, everything else seemed to fade away. "Mom?" Lily cried, throwing her arms around Emily's waist. Emily crouched down, holding her daughter tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. She had missed Lily's warmth, her innocent love. "Hey, sweetheart," Emily whispered, kissing the top of her head. "I missed you so much." Gregory stood at the edge of the driveway, watching the reunion quietly. His face was unreadable, but Emily could feel his gaze, heavy with unspoken words. She straightened up, letting Lily go just enough to take a step toward Gregory. "Thanks for bringing her," Emily said softly. I know it's not easy." Gregory nodded but didn't say anything. He just watched them for a moment, his emotions masked behind a wall of silence. It was clear that he wasn't there to talk, to offer comfort. He was there to do his part for Lily, and that was it. "I'll pick her up at 6, he said, his voice steady but distant. "I'll be here at the same time." Emily nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. I'll make sure she's ready." Gregory didn't linger any longer. Without another word, he turned and walked back to the car, leaving Emily and Lily standing together in the driveway. Emily looked down at her daughter, whose smile was wide and full of innocence, unaware of the tension between her parents. "I'm so glad you're here," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're going to have so much fun today." Lily's eyes sparkled. "What are we doing, Mom?" "We're going to the park," Emily said, taking her daughter's hand and leading her inside. As they walked into the apartment, Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had to be strong for Lily's sake. No matter what had happened between her and Gregory, no matter the mistakes she had made, she couldn't let her daughter see her falter. The afternoon was a blur of laughter, games, and the familiar warmth of motherhood that Emily had missed so desperately. They played on the swings, had a picnic in the park, and even took silly pictures with Emily's old camera. For a few hours, Emily could almost forget the painful reality of her situation. She could pretend just for a little while that everything was okay. But as the sun began to set, Emily knew it was time to let go. Gregory arrived promptly at 6, and with a polite nod, he took Lily's hand. "Time to go, sweetie," he said gently. Lily looked up at her mom with a frown. "Can't I stay a little longer, Mom?" Emily knelt down again, her heart breaking at the sight of her daughter's disappointed face. "I'm afraid not, sweetheart. But we'll have another day soon, okay? I promise." Lily hugged her tightly one last time before letting go. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too," Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She watched as Gregory led their daughter back to the car, the sight of them walking away sending a sharp pain through her chest. As they drove off, Emily stood in the doorway staring after them. She knew this was the closest she would get to a family now, a family she had broken beyond repair. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but she had to keep moving forward. For Lily. For herself. The pain would never go away, but Emily knew that the only thing she could control now was her own future. The weeks that followed Lily's visit were a blur of daily routines and small moments of reflection for both Gregory and Emily. For Gregory, life continued on its steady course. He had learned to live without Emily, and though the scar of betrayal would always linger, he had found a certain peace in the life he was now building for himself and Lily. Their small apartment had become a sanctuary, a place where Lily could grow and thrive, and where Gregory could focus on what truly mattered, being the father she needed. But the shadows of his past, of his marriage, were never far behind. At work, when his mind wandered during a long day of meetings, he found himself thinking of Emily, of their early days together, of the life they had dreamed of. There were moments when he wondered if things could have turned out differently. But those thoughts were fleeting, quickly extinguished by the reality of her betrayal. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget the pain. Emily, too, continued her struggle, but it was a fight that felt unending. The guilt that clung to her was suffocating. While she had started to rebuild her photography career, the path was slow, and the work felt empty compared to the success she had once known. Clients who had once trusted her now turned away, and she found herself accepting small, less-than-ideal jobs just to make ends meet. Her work no longer brought her joy. Instead, it reminded her of everything she had lost. She missed Lily more than words could express. Each time she dropped her off or saw Gregory at a distance, a pang of longing would twist in her chest. But she couldn't fix the damage. She couldn't change the choices she had made. The guilt consumed her every time she picked up her camera, every time she checked her emails, every time she met a potential client. Her once thriving career felt like a shadow of its former self. One afternoon, as she sat in her small studio apartment, Emily received a call that shook her to the core. It was from her lawyer. "Emily, I've received an offer from Gregory's attorney," the lawyer said. "It's about the custody arrangements for Lily." Her stomach dropped. She hadn't been expecting anything like this. The divorce had been tough, but this felt different. She had known that Gregory was protective of Lily, rightfully so, but she hadn't expected the legal battle to intensify so soon. The lawyer continued, "They're requesting full custody, and they're asking for a court hearing to finalize everything." Emily's mind raced. Full custody? She hadn't been prepared for this. She had assumed that things would remain amicable between her and Gregory, especially when it came to their daughter. But now, the reality of losing her daughter permanently was staring her in the face. "What do I do?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "You'll need to gather evidence of your ability to care for Lily, your financial situation, your living arrangements. It's going to be a tough fight," the lawyer advised. "But we can certainly defend your case." After the call ended, Emily sat in silence for a long while. Full custody of Lily meant that Gregory was seeking more than just physical custody. It meant that he wanted to control all aspects of her upbringing. It meant that she could lose her daughter forever, and that realization hit her harder than anything else. She had made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but the thought of losing Lily was too much to bear. The days leading up to the court hearing were filled with anxiety. Emily gathered every bit of evidence she could: letters of recommendation, financial statements, and character references. She reached out to old friends and colleagues, hoping they would stand by her in this fight. But in her heart, she knew the truth: she was fighting an uphill battle. Gregory, meanwhile, had been focused on his work and Lily. The decision to pursue full custody had not come easily. He wanted to protect Lily from the pain and confusion of their broken marriage, but he also believed that Emily, in her current state, wasn't capable of offering the stability their daughter needed. Gregory had seen the toll the affair had taken on Emily, and although part of him felt sorry for her, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lily deserved better. On the day of the hearing, Emily stood in the courthouse, her heart pounding in her chest. Her lawyer had prepared her for the worst, but nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming sense of failure she felt as she walked into that courtroom. Gregory was already seated on the other side, his face impassive, his eyes cold. He looked like a man determined to win, and Emily couldn't help but feel like the battle was already lost. The hearing began and both sides presented their cases. Gregory's attorney spoke of his stable job, his home, and his commitment to providing a secure future for Lily. Emily's lawyer spoke of her love for her daughter and her efforts to rebuild her career, but the damage had been done. Emily could feel the weight of her past mistakes pressing down on her as the judge listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she choked on her words. She tried to explain how much she loved Lily, how she was trying to make things right, but the words felt hollow. She could see the judgment in the eyes of everyone in the room, her peers, the lawyer, and most painfully Gregory. He was not just a distant figure in her life now. He was a man with power, someone who could take everything she had left. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally spoke. "I have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. Given the circumstances and the stability that Gregory has provided for Lily, I am awarding him full custody." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Emily's world crumbled around her as the reality of the decision set in. She had lost. She had lost the one thing that mattered most. Gregory looked at her, his eyes still cold. "I'm sorry, Emily. This is what's best for Lily." Emily nodded, fighting back tears. "I understand." As they left the courtroom, Gregory didn't offer her any comfort. There was nothing left to say. Emily knew that this was the final chapter of their relationship. It was over. She had lost Lily and there was no way to get her back. The drive home was long and quiet. Emily felt numb. Her entire life had been defined by the choices she had made, and now she was paying the price. As she looked out the window, she wondered if she would ever be able to forgive herself for what she had done. But as the days passed, Emily knew she had no choice but to keep moving forward. She had to rebuild, and this time it would be alone. The decision to grant Gregory full custody of Lily had shattered Emily in ways she didn't know were possible. She spent the first few days after the hearing in a haze, unable to fully grasp the weight of the court's decision. She had lost her daughter, the one thing that had kept her grounded during the chaos of her life. The guilt was a constant companion, creeping into her thoughts at every turn, reminding her of the mistakes she had made and the price she was paying for them. But time, as it always does, moved forward. And so did Emily. She had no choice but to pick up the pieces of her broken life. She returned to her small apartment, the place that now felt like both a refuge and a prison. It was quiet, too quiet. The walls, once filled with the sounds of Lily's laughter and chatter, now seemed to echo her solitude. Emily tried to fill the emptiness with work. She worked harder than she ever had before, taking on any job she could find, hoping that the exhaustion would numb the ache in her chest. But the truth was, nothing could fill the void left by Lily. Every photograph she took, every gig she completed, felt like a hollow victory. There was no joy in it anymore. It was all just a means to an end. The days blurred together, and Emily found herself sinking into a depression she couldn't escape. Then, one evening, as Emily sat in front of her laptop, trying to find inspiration for a new project, she received a message. It was from one of her former clients, a bride she had worked with years ago. The message was simple. "I know it's been a while, but I wanted to let you know that your wedding photos were amazing. We've recommended you to a few friends, and I hope we can work together again someday." Emily stared at the message for a long time. She had been so caught up in the pain of her personal life that she had neglected her work. But here was a small glimmer of hope, an opportunity to rebuild her reputation, to prove to herself that she could still do this. That night she made a decision. She would stop wallowing in her failure. She would stop blaming herself for everything that had gone wrong. She would take control of her life again. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be quick, but it was the only choice she had. Emily started reaching out to old contacts, re-establishing the relationships she had lost. She attended networking events, even when she felt like an outsider, a shadow of her former self. Slowly she began to regain the trust of her peers, and with each small success, the weight on her shoulders lightened just a little. Her work, while still tinged with the remnants of her past, began to take on new meaning. She poured everything she had into every project, trying to reclaim the passion she once had for photography. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when the emptiness threatened to swallow her whole, but she kept going. One day, after months of hard work and perseverance, Emily received an email that changed everything. It was from a high-profile wedding planner she had worked with in the past. The planner had recommended Emily to one of her most prestigious clients, a couple whose wedding would be one of the most talked-about events of the year. The contract would pay more than any gig Emily had ever taken on, and it was exactly the kind of opportunity she needed to fully rebuild her career. As she read the email, a sense of accomplishment washed over her. She wasn't there yet, she wasn't back to the top of her game, but she was moving in the right direction. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt a spark of hope. She knew that rebuilding her life would take time, and she had no illusions about how hard it would be. But she also knew that she wasn't the same person she had been when she made those mistakes. She had learned painfully from them, and that had made her stronger. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Emily worked tirelessly on her new project, pouring everything she had into capturing the perfect shots for her clients. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about redemption, about proving to herself that she could rise from the ashes of her past. As the wedding approached, Emily felt more confident than she had in years. She was no longer the woman who had made careless choices. She was someone who had been broken, but had found the strength to put herself back together. But even as Emily's career began to flourish, she still had moments of doubt. She missed Lily more than she could put into words, and every day without her felt like a loss. There were times when she would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, and wonder if she would ever be able to make things right with her daughter. But Emily knew that her relationship with Lily would take time to heal. She couldn't rush it and she couldn't force it. What mattered now was that she was trying. She was building a life that was worthy of her daughter's love, a life that hopefully would one day be enough for Lily to see. One weekend, after a particularly successful shoot, Emily received a call from Gregory. Her heart skipped a beat. It had been weeks since they had spoken outside of the necessary arrangements for Lily. She answered the phone with a sense of trepidation. "Hello. Emily," Gregory said, his voice steady but not unfriendly. "I just wanted to check in. Lily's been asking about you again. She misses you." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. "I miss her too, Greg. More than you know." There was a long pause before Gregory spoke again. "I think it's time for us to talk. Not about the past but about what comes next, for Lily's sake. We need to figure out how we move forward from here." The words hit Emily like a wave. She had been waiting for this moment, for an opening, a chance to finally rebuild some semblance of a relationship with her daughter. But she knew that she had to be patient. Reconciliation wouldn't come overnight. It would take time and it would take effort. "I'm ready," Emily said quietly, her voice full of resolve. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to be there for her. I just need the chance. Gregory's tone softened, and for the first time in a long time, Emily heard a flicker of hope in his voice. We'll figure it out. One step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, Emily believed him. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but it was a road she was willing to walk. For Lily. For herself. For a second chance.